We're starting tonight. The series is called Goated Grapes. And everybody, let's just say it all together. A goat is what? The greatest of all time. Exactly. So greatest of all time, that means that we're talking about grape varieties that really stand out. Last time it was Chardonnay. This time it's Cabernet Sauvignon. And there's a lot of reasons that a grape could be a goat. Those two grapes were the grapes in the Paris tasting of 1976. Probably because they were known as goats at the time, but in your opinion, what makes Cabernet Sauvignon one of the goats?
Well, I'll say is, when we talk about varietals that are goats, if you will, we talk about noble varietals. And these are varietals that, while there's a lot of very interesting grape varietals, thousands of them all around the world, there are certain varietals that have proven themselves to consistently produce great wines. In good years and not so great years, they produce a complete palate. They're usually aromatic varietals. They have the structure, and they've also proven to be able to cellar well and age for a very long time. And there's a lot of wines that I really like to drink that are really interesting, especially when they're young, and maybe they can age for a few years. But they either typically have a structural hole where they're sort of missing something, but they're still very good. Or they just don't have the potential for longevity in the cellar. It doesn't make them, any less important as far as like having wines, in your collection to just drink when they're really young. Those are very important wines. But you look at something like Cabernet Sauvignon. Cabernet Sauvignon has been able to prove that it can age for 200 years in the bottle and still be drinkable, right? There's a lot of varietals that we like to drink that are fresh and vibrant, aromatic, that are never going to do that. They're just incapable. They don't have the DNA. They don't have the structure to do that.
I think that's perfectly well said, and it's interesting because they just did, Patrick Cappiello and some other sommeliers just did they called it 76 redo, and they did, but this time they added Chenin Blanc and Syrah to the mix. And I think that the other thing that they were amplifying on there is that they're classic French grapes that developed classic status like you described, ageability. Do they travel well is the question, right?
You mean as far as ageability?
They age well, but do they travel well to other regions and achieve that majesty? I think we can say Chardonnay and Cabernet do. I think they were trying to show maybe the other ones could as well.
They pulled Chenin Blanc and Syrah into the conversation because those two varietals have proven to do well in some other regions and produce high quality wine. You look at Chenin Blanc in South Africa with a really high quality, they call it Steen. And in California, we've proven to produce really great Chenin Blancs. Syrah, obviously with Australian Shiraz, but I mean, some of my favorite Syrahs in the world actually now come from California. And I think young winemakers in California are making some of the best in the world, and those are age-worthy wines. They'll never age as long as Cabernet Sauvignon, but they'll age a lot longer than most people would ever hold those wines. Let's put it that way.
Right, well said. Yeah. And so it's and for me, in addition to what you were talking about, their sort of completeness and aromatic detail, and of course their ability to get better with age, just like all of us, right? We're all getting better with age, for sure. That's our story, and we're sticking with it. But is also, I think this is why Stephen Spurrier and Patricia Gallagher selected Chardonnay and Cabernet, is that those grape varieties and other regions have proven this as well. They travel well to other places, keeping their character, but picking up the local accent, right?
Yeah. They also were the most important regions at the time. You have to remember at that time, Bordeaux was the most important red wine growing region in the world, and there was really no close second at that time. And then as we go and we talk about the Judgment of Paris, we'll get into a discussion about that hierarchy of regions and people just exposure, what makes a region great. But at the time, I mean, Bordeaux was king, and there's a reason for that.
Yes.
And White Burgundy was really king, and there's a reason for that, right? They had earned that title. But what that tasting proved was there was potential in other places that had not been uncovered yet.
And I think that was really the logic that they were using in deciding to do that tasting. I was really inspired by that notion that really the belief in, if you travel the European grapes, you travel the European know-how, because the French know-how has very much been a big factor
big time.
in places in all these regions where the wines have been able to achieve that same level. You can really also pick up some kind of a new expression of that, and have a terroir expression that you didn't expect. And I think the belief in that was probably what really made the Paris tasting visionaries stand out. And so that inspiration actually drove me, and I know you're familiar with this project, to work on a documentary series, which I'm just launching. The first 3 episodes will be on Delta flights this summer, July, August, and September. It's called The Swirled Cup, and it talks not about so much the Paris tasting, but everything that it spawned. So I'm going to show you a little quick teaser from that. You'll see some familiar faces.
Nobody thought that it would be even possible to compete with the great French wine.
There's no fait accompli. There's no gold medal forever.
The news of the judgment of Paris came like a bit shock for me, but that also encouraged me to go ahead with our movement in Italy.
Paris tasting changed everything. I think initially it was sort of under the radar, and then all of a sudden it just blew up. It's got to be the fastest appreciation of any wine region in the world in history.
I think you see there's a vest theme going down there for sure.
We have a diurnal shift here, huh?
Yes, we do.
You know,
Exactly.
it's cold in the morning. You know,
So one of the early lovers, American wine lovers of Bordeaux wine, was Thomas Jefferson. His birthday, I know it's Happy Tax Day, but Thomas Jefferson's birthday was 2 days ago. And I'm actually starting us off in terms of our wines, not with a Cabernet Sauvignon, but rather with a Bordeaux-inspired wine. So wine number 1 is actually a wine from Virginia. And it is a really, it's the first thing that I want to say that makes Cabernet Sauvignon special is how well it blends with and becomes this sort of symphonic contributor to blends. And we're going to explore that quite a bit with our lineup here. But this is the 2021 Octagon, and we can go ahead and take a look at that label. And the name is inspired by the Palladian architecture. This is a floor plan that Thomas Jefferson did for his friend, the governor of the state of Virginia. It is Merlot driven, 64% Merlot, as you can see. And he came back from France and brought both great Bordeaux wines, but also the dream of making wine of the quality of Europe in the United States. What was the problem? Because it took some time. They've got it going on today, but he had some trouble.
Well, there's a lot of issues. I mean, we always talk about a region's potential, and we forget that there's a lot that goes into taking that potential and turning it into a great bottle of wine. And part of it is just the viticultural knowledge, which, you know, at that time there were very few records. It was spoken. People would go and they would talk about things. Regions just sort of handed these traditions down generation to generations. There weren't a whole lot of books and records. There were some, but not enough. But then you're also going into a completely different region, different climate, different precipitation patterns, levels, disease pressures, the know-how of local labor. I mean, there's so many things that go into it. On top of that, facilities, winemaking, barrel. I mean, there's so much that goes into just uncovering the potential of a region. And we didn't have that in the U.S. You have to remember, is most of the people who came to the U.S. at the time that were sort of dominant, they came from the U.K. They have no viticultural background whatsoever outside of just drinking an enormous amount of wine, because British were very big consumers of wine, but they were not farmers. They didn't understand how to develop a vineyard, choose the right site, plant it properly. The centuries of Mazzei selection and material that was planted and right for the right region, the know-how on how to farm it, how to make it. I mean, it was nothing. I mean, you just raw potential. But obviously, Thomas Jefferson was a massive Francophile. He not only loved the wine, but he loved the cuisine, and spent actually, if you read a lot of the old history books, too much time in France. To the point where people thought that he had sort of alienated the country and his responsibilities in the country because he was enjoying himself, eating and drinking in France, which I don't blame him.
Indeed.
Yeah.
Well, and I think also, and we've got Holly is saying that Barboursville is on.
Oh, yeah.
She says, and this is such an incredible wine. And I just want to point out that we have a fabulous pairing plate here with us that Chef Chris Limerand from the Grove Restaurant prepared for us. And he takes a little bit of cue from me, but then he always has some tricks up his sleeve. So we have this really incredible custard here that it's got some confit Guinea hen, it's got some puffed quinoa, it's got a lot of cool stuff. Did I get that about right-ish? Okay, pretty close going on. So I would love for you to try a little bite of that with this wine, because I think the subtlety of this wine is really sort of geared to that. I also just tasted it. We've got popcorn, because if you know me, you know I'm a popcorn and wine fan. Popcorn, and I threw a little bit of the chopped thyme. On your left is chopped thyme, on your right is chopped rosemary. Just bringing in a little bit of that herbaceous character with the Pinot Noir makes a really nice pairing with this. But it's when I was doing some of the research for this documentary, I actually read Thomas Jefferson on Wine, which is I think it's an 18-hour read. And much of it is taken from his garden book and from his notations, all of which went into the initial collection that created the Library of Congress. So dude was very studious about his wine and his grape varieties and tried very, very hard. Also took a long time to get there because the vines were not adapted to the pests and diseases of the United States. Now we have solutions for that. But let's take a look at a little quick video of Barboursville so you can see kind of where this comes from. It was the dream of America's founding fathers like Thomas Jefferson who designed this mansion, a governor's mansion that's now a ruin, that the wines of America would someday rival the quality of those of Europe, especially France and Italy.
Thomas Jefferson was very intrigued and attracted by the European culture in general. When he was in France, he learns about the great wines of Bordeaux, which then he imports after he comes here back in Virginia. So you go from 1807, from the last planting of Jefferson at 22 European varieties, to 1976 to really see his dream come through of be able to produce a great bottle of wine in Virginia. That was his dream, and here it came to be.
And so the other thing you should know about Barboursville that's so cool is that he's from Piedmont. And the other wine style, the other wine style, or one of them that Thomas Jefferson really fell in love with, was Nebbiolo, which was, I think, sparkling and slightly sweet at the time. But anyway, they make a great Nebbiolo because Luca Pasquina, who you just heard from, is from there, and I think it's
a beautiful region. If you ever get the opportunity, if you're in DC, I grew up in DC, so I spent some time out in this area, and it's it's close enough to DC you can just take a quick trip out. It's absolutely beautiful. There's a number of fantastic wineries. This is definitely the most historic for obvious reasons, but there's a lot of like new kids on the block. It's a really fantastic region. A lot of the wines are consumed within the area because there's a lot of tourism, but they're world class. There's obviously a very famous RDV does a great job. They actually got acquired by a very major French Bordeaux producer. So it shows you what the potential is, not just the potential, but the quality of the wines that are already being produced there.
Absolutely. Well, so it's a great segue into Bordeaux, really the mothership for Cabernet Sauvignon, because our next wine that we're tasting is the Château Lascombes. And I should say that, first of all, thank you. Because you're the CEO of Lawrence Wine Estates, but also Domine Estates, which is the importer of two of the great wines that we have here. And this is a completely, now we're going into the classic Bordeaux expression, although I would say the Octagon in terms of a blend is a pretty typical Bordeaux blend because so much Merlot. But take us into where does Cabernet work and why, and talk a little bit about this wine. And we'll just go ahead and show the label as we get started on the discussion.
Yeah, so our company bought Château Lascombes in 2022. So we didn't ferment this wine, but we did the aging and the blending. Our first vintage fully farming and making wine was in 2023. We hired Axel Heitz, who's now the director and oversees everything. And Bordeaux is an interesting model in the sense that It's a very flat region. It's not like the Napa, which is very dramatic. The Napa Valley is very dramatic, big mountain ranges. Bordeaux is very, very flat, but under the surface, there's great diversity in the soils. So Bordeaux, from very early on, decided not to really focus so much on varietal, but really focus on blends. And so instead of having an anchor varietal, what they said was we would plant the right varietal for the right soil. So what you often see is a lot of Merlot planted in clay and Cabernet Sauvignon planted in a lot of the rocky soils. They mix that up a bit as well because that gives you some complexity. There's a lot of Cabernet planted in clay as well. So this wine in 2022, this is predominantly Cabernet Sauvignon, but a high percentage of Merlot. This comes from Margaux. Château Lascombes is a second growth. The Château was originally developed it was before the French Revolution, so in the late 1600s. Then the Chevalier de Lascombes sort of took over. They were executed during the French Revolution. New owners took over, and it's been consistently making wine for 400 years now, which is pretty incredible for a chateau. But what really makes it work really well in Bordeaux is Bordeaux's a continental climate, and they get the rain throughout the entire season. It's pretty cloudy, so while it actually can get very, very warm in Bordeaux, it's not very sunny. So they don't have a diurnal shift like we have. A diurnal shift is when it's sort of cold in the morning, gets very warm in the middle of the day, and then it gets cold again at night. Well, they don't have that in Bordeaux. So in the middle of the summer, it's really cold and rainy springs, then it gets really warm, but it's warm during the day and at night. So it sort of slowly ramps up, gets really, really warm, and then they have harvest. But you would say, okay, well, it gets way too warm. But they get relief through rain, right? So they get rain all the way through, oftentimes even through harvest. So they have major issues with mildew. What that does is that keeps a really good balance in the vineyard. The clay can hold a good amount of water, while the gravelly soils and the sand will be much more well drained. And those they almost create two different growing conditions that you have to farm almost like separate regions, even though the climate's the same. So there's a lot of elements that go into growing these varietals in Bordeaux that are not just the soil, it's the plant material, it's the varietal, it's the season, it's everything. But really, Bordeaux is the benchmark for our understanding of what a classical expression of great Cabernet Sauvignon and Cabernet Sauvignon blends are.
Perfect. And let's take a look one more time at that label because, okay, you mentioned that it's a second growth, and you see that right there on the label. If we can just go back and explain that, because the classification only applied to that one section of Bordeaux and kind of a Cabernet-driven area. Just talk about that.
Yeah, so in 1855 for the World's Fair, Bordeaux had already sort of planted its flag as really the great red wine region in the world at the time. Great support from the British, the Dutch, and so forth and so on. And they decided to start classifying these into a hierarchy of at the time, a combination of both quality and price typically followed quality, right? And popularity due to the quality. And they ranked them, and these were in the main villages on the left bank of Bordeaux in the Medoc. So you had all these other regions, but this is specifically about the major chateau in the Medoc. Into first growth, which are the sort of highest ranking, down to the fifth growth. And Château Lascombes was classified and remains a second growth in Margaux, which is really rarefied air, and it's also the largest chateau in Margaux.
So I know that the French would probably not do this, but I just threw some rosemary on top of my popcorn with a little bit of the salt, and had that. The
French are way too precious when it comes to drinking wine.
With second growth Bordeaux, and let me just say that is a really amazing pairing, but it's also absolutely delicious with the custard. For those of you who are with us at home, those of you who are not, I hope you'll remember that when you're in the Napa Valley, you can come and join us. We do this monthly here live at Copia, and you get to taste along, get to have the food, and it's fantastic. Brian Stoller, though, apparently is quite the expert on Virginia wines, but also Maryland wines. And us talking about, we did actually feature Early Mountain Brian on a prior broadcast. Their Petite Manseng was on our first live broadcast with an in-person
make
audience.
big up at Two Mexican
It's
Time.
really fantastic, and it was a great food wine. But he's also mentioning Virginia wineries, and I think that's really cool that almost every state really now makes very
and you
fun
see
wine.
the quality go up. I mean, we talk about that. The potential of a region is meaningless without the talent to express it. Right now, America has such great winemaking talent that people are starting to spread their wings. You see people training and then going to regions like the high country in Texas and Virginia and New York, and what you see is the quality increasing. Well, the dirt didn't get any better, the weather didn't get better. It's just they have talent that understands quality viticulture and winemaking to express the place at a higher level.
Perfect. So our next wine number 3, is really another story of friendship and mentorship and friendship going back a long way. I would say our friendship as a country with the French, outside of all the wine know-how that they've brought to us and so many other countries, is pretty deep. We're coming into America 250 celebration, and I don't think we'd have a country without the French. They were really big investors of money and also talent to help us get where we are. So that's pretty special. This one, though, is an Italian, Phillip or Filippo Mazzei, from the Mazzei family, whose winery still exists today under, I think, the same family lineage, correct?
It is, yeah. They've been making wine continuously for 600 years, the Mazzei family.
So this is the wine that is named for Phillip, because he was a close dear friend of Thomas Jefferson. I think he was a wine merchant and maybe actually sold his wine.
Yeah, he was. So obviously this is one of the big noble families in Italy, in Tuscany. Massive holdings, various different types of businesses. Filippo Mazzei took a special interest in horticulture and viticulture. Loved wine. They were already in the wine business at that point for 250 years. He spent some time in the UK being a wine merchant. And then over time, met some of the early sort of pioneers of America, and they expressed an interest in having Europeans come over and essentially help them sort of develop vineyards because they love drinking wine. Mainly, that was the main reason. And he made it his business to come over, and he actually bought a pretty large tranche of land in Virginia and developed vineyards and taught them about viticulture and planted Vitis vinifera, which are the grape varietals that we all know today, which are all mainly from Europe and that part of the world. All the way down actually to Persian countries as well, some Vitis vinifera. But he was really instrumental in the Virginia wine industry, which also was just the beginning of the wine industry in America in general. Obviously, you had various other Europeans that had come through and sort of planted some vines, but he really was super knowledgeable. He'd come with this lineage of centuries of understanding of viticulture. He was a plant dork. He brought budwood. He brought teams of viticulturists from Italy and really set up a real wine growing region in Virginia. So it's not a name that we really know. A lot of times in America, we don't like to give a lot of Europeans a lot of credit for the work that he did here because we kicked them all out. But he was really instrumental in bringing proper viticulture and the budwood and the know-how to Virginia.
Yeah, and I'd like to, let's show that label one more time, because I think I was, when you guys suggested this for the tasting, I didn't realize it was 100% Cabernet.
Yeah,
this is very cool.
So this is a blend.
And it's French and American oak, which is kind of apropos.
Yes, and they did that intentionally. So we actually are a company that I run. We import the Mazzei family wines into the U.S. And they own vineyards, tons of vineyards around the region of Chianti Classico, all the different villages, but also in Maremma, close to the coast. So this is a blend of Cabernet Sauvignon plantings from Maremma and Chianti, but in homage to Filippo Mazzei's contribution to the U.S., decided to integrate some American oak to show that sort of partnership through this wine. It's a really fantastic wine.
It's fantastic, and I think the thing that I think a lot of people don't know as well is that Mazzei was acknowledged in a congressional resolution, I think in either the late 90s or early 2000s, finally, because his writings were paraphrased in the line in the Declaration, all men are created equal. And so that came from his partnership with Thomas Jefferson and their influence on that. So still got a long way to go on that concept, but we are the
the whole world does.
Yes, we do. But the petri dish, or that's the principle, and we're all doing everything we can. So this, I had to have it with I forgot what this type of charcuterie is. He told me, what is it, chef? Bresaola. Okay, so of course, it being an Italian wine, I had to have it with that, and it's delicious. But I really loved it with the custard as well. And the cheese that you have is Manchego, which from the time that my kids have grown up, we called it mommy cheese because I love this cheese with wine. Most people go for Parmigiano Reggiano, but to me that's a little too salty.
Yeah.
And this one is like, it strikes that balance of giving you those amino acid crystal crunchies and that nuttiness, but without being too salty. Yeah. So I definitely suggest that you try that pairing. And I wanted to ask you, let's take a moment here, and then we'll get to the Napa wine. But let's take a moment and talk about. Actually, I think we're tasting. Are we tasting Chile first? Let's see. Can you find out what the wine number 4 was? I just want to make sure I've got that.
Heitz, yeah.
Okay, I just want to make sure. The tell, if you were going to, for all you people who are blind tasting practicers or going for your credential, your certification, is there a tell for Italian Super Tuscan Cabernet versus Bordeaux, or what?
I think that's really, really difficult. One, because they lack consistency in their blends. They're all over the place, which is what we love about them as consumers. But as far as trying to find some typicity in them, very, very difficult. Because you'll get some that are pure sort of Bordeaux blends, Cabernet, Merlot, Petit Verdot. You get some that are Merlot heavy, then you get some that are Merlot and Syrah. You get some that are Cabernet and Sangiovese. It's all over the board. I would say that their winemaking techniques typically will give you, it's just a sort of a benchmark of Italian wines, what they call a little volatile acidity on the nose. And it's just how they make wine a lot of times. But you have to remember is most of this part of Tuscany is a true Mediterranean climate. It's probably more akin to Napa than it is to Bordeaux in its climate and temperature and so forth. So I would probably link it more to Napa style than I would Bordeaux.
Yeah, that's a good. I think that's a good point.
It's sunny and dry and warm.
Yeah, they've got the Mediterranean climate. They've got the ocean influence. That's a great point. And I guess that also that just more undulated topography that probably
they do. They've got a little bit more of a hill than Bordeaux.
Yeah.
But they don't have mountains like we do.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Their farm is a little easier.
A little bit easier for sure. So I loved this with the custard as well. And if you're looking for guidance, you're kind of my tasters who are here in the room are. I'm sure you're capable of, doing your experimentation, but so far so good? Yeah? All right. So pretty cool to have this sort of world tour of Cabernet Sauvignon, and we're not done yet. I'm going to go off script. I'm going to take you out of your tasting order that's on your tasting sheet. I know. You're like, we're 3 wines into it. This is going to be a problem. But I really want to go to wine number 5 first. Because I feel like I want to end on the Heitz Cabernet from a body perspective and so on. My bad. But keeping with our theme of mentorship, friendship, emerging terroir, in exploring the themes of this documentary, I realized that there were a few players who had a really big role in that. Now, you could go back to 250 years and say Filippo Mazzei for sure, and it's a similar thing, though, in that era, in the sense that we had, here in the Napa Valley, Robert Mondavi, who was really determined to show, by creating it, by willing it through commitment to quality, the potential for California wines. But it wasn't just California. His sights were on the idea that great terroirs, there were a lot of great terroirs around the world.
Yeah, and this is a rare thing. I mean, this is a very American mindset because we were, California's been producing wine for a long time, but really Prohibition sort of ruined a lot of our sort of cultural connection to wine. It was sort of reborn. So if you look at that, by the time Robert Mondavi enters the picture, we're really only drinking wine again for 30 years. Still very new,
right?
In a sense, especially modern winemaking. So for him to see the potential of Napa in a time where no one cared about the Napa Valley, we really have to look back, 60 years and remember that no one in the world cared about the Napa Valley. They didn't know where it was. They didn't hear the name. They had no clue what it was. And these people were working with very little applause, but they knew that there was something there. They could taste it. They knew the quality was there. It was like, how do we get the world to know that? So he knew what it meant to be an underdog, but have so much potential. And I think that's what fueled his energy to go around the world and find these other terroirs. People remember is Robert Mondavi was one of the original developers of Ornellaia, a super Tuscan. He's the one who actually developed that with an Italian family, and then obviously going down to South America with the wine we're tasting now, which no one cared about South American wine. They just didn't, and not at a quality level, right? South American wine, they had started to export a lot of wine, but it was cheap jug wine, not what we have in our glass today.
Right, and so there were a few families, though, that were really, really determined in the same way that California had been in the 60s and early 70s, really before that, but especially by that time, getting some critical mass. And one of those was the Chadwick family.
Yeah.
And Eduardo Chadwick and Robert Mondavi became close friends and started and teamed up on this partnership. Here's a picture of them early in the early days of that. I think they started in the mid 1990s and were creating this wine called Seña, which I think is a sign of, and getting to the point where by 2004, Eduardo Chadwick was saying, we think we have something that's global potential in the same way that in the 1976 tasting the Americans did. And he did something called the Judgment of Berlin with this wine and another of the family's wines. This time it was comparing blind and with professional palates against classic French Bordeaux's benchmarks and Italian Super Tuscans. And the wines fared really well. They made the top 2 spots. When we have these tastings, there are no winners and losers. These are all great wines within a hair's breadth of a point.
Yeah, and one thing I'll say about this is really interesting. When we talk about, again, the talent, Robert Mondavi was one of the greatest visionaries in the wine industry in the history of the world. He just was. Incredible marketer, incredible sales guy, incredible visionary, kind of guy who just made things happen. But Tim Mondavi was really like the guy who understood viticulture and winemaking at a high level in the family. And when they went down and developed this project, much like Tim's impact with Robert Mondavi Winery here, most people know that Tim was the winemaker in the family. He was the guy who was actually making all those great old Mondavi wines that, especially from through the late 70s and 80s, because he was in the class of 74 at UC Davis. He came out. He'd already obviously come from a winemaking family. But all his late 70s and 80s, that was Tim, and he was really instrumental in developing the vineyard for Seña, the plant material, where to plant, because obviously at that time land was very cheap down there. You could pretty much just choose where you wanted to plant things. Winemaking style, Tim had a really big impact. It was the whole Mondavi family, but it was really Mondavi's sort of vision, and Tim was the family member who was armed with making it happen. And I think part of that was just their mentality of they knew that there was a really big fight in Napa to get the world to recognize the quality. I wouldn't say potential because it was already realized, it was in the bottle, but to care. And I think he had already gone through that and understood what the Chadwick family had in their hands and said, look, we've already had our battle, we'll go in this battle with you guys as well. And we can see in the glass, it's the results are really extraordinary.
Yeah, and at the same time that was all happening, the French were noticing it too, and Michel Rolland was down there working with the L'Apostole property.
Michel Rolland was he really was instrumental in all of South America, Chile, and Argentina in helping them advance their viticulture and winemaking. He actually ended up owning an estate down there. had a massive, massive impact in bringing up the overall quality of South American wine.
Yeah.
I mean, they should put a statue of that guy in every wine region there.
Yep.
Seriously.
Totally agree. And I want to just say a thank you to Eduardo Chadwick, because we did throw a bonus wine at you guys. The very last glass is actually a 2017 of the
awesome.
Seña. So you get to taste one with even
that's
more
beautiful.
bottle age. It's gorgeous, right?
Yeah, and Chile is a really interesting country because there's the old story. They wanted to bring in these Bordeaux varietals, and they had sort of earmarked Merlot as their varietal, and they brought in a bunch of Merlot, and they realized that they had brought in these different clones from different places, and different clones tasted wildly different, and they started to rename this one clone Merlot Chileno, I think it was called. And a French consultant came down, this is like, 15, 20 years later, and recognized that it was actually Carmenere. It was not Merlot at all, which made a lot of sense. Carmenere is a varietal that has a very sort of green, spicy aromatic, very pronounced, very strong.
Yep.
You rarely would, in Bordeaux it was used in very small amounts, and it's really hard to grow, so people didn't favor it. But they had a ton of it in Chile, and that's how it became so famous in Chile, because they thought they were planting Merlot.
But I love that how you described it. To me, it depends your generation, but I grew up with something called manwich sauce, and it has this gamey, meaty, but also slightly like peppercorn thing that I love. Let's take a quick look at the label of the Seña. Now, this is the blend for the 2020, the younger one that you had, but you see a full-on 15% of the Carmenere in that. I may have the blend, I'm not sure, because I'm
You can smell it.
not very organized.
That's a pretty high percent, and it really that greenness that you're smelling, that peppercorn, that's the Carmenere.
And it's so, to me, it smells like a meal, right?
Yeah.
And so, what I was doing, first of all, I just keep going back and smelling the glass because it's so detailed and layered and complex. It's showing some bottle age, but it also, I feel like, still has beautiful fruit and lots of acid to stand up to time. I had it with the cheese. I also had it with a little bit, again, of the rosemary popcorn. I'm kind of on a theme on that one right now. But what do you think? Are you happy that with the generosity of that's pretty special. How many people have been to Chile, to the wine country? I had the chance to go there a couple of times, and it feels like the Napa Valley. That and Tuscany, the two together, they have the topography. Everything grows there.
And the Aconcagua sort of sits in between these two ranges as well, so it's similar. And the people are extraordinary. The food's fantastic. It's a great country. If you haven't just gone to Chile, it's a really beautiful place to visit. Very easy to get to. And it's a really interesting country because, as you've seen on the map, it's very narrow and very long. So you can be on the ocean surfing, get in your car and drive, and actually go up and ski the same day.
That's the thing that I think reminded me of a little bit, not the ski part, but a little bit. It's a little bit longer drive, but we're that close to the coast, and it's so everything grows, everything swims, like everything you could want is really close by, and that's pretty special. So super loving that wine. Last wine that we're going to taste, and thank you for playing along with me, my in-person folks here. And Tom Marsland from Gainesville says hello. Hi, Tom.
Hey, Tom.
But I wanted to, of course, end up at home base here in the Napa Valley, and it's another story of a visionary and a story of mentorship and friendship. Really two visionaries, but one of them, Andrei Telechev, and I'm not saying he was instrumental in Heitz, but French know-how. Before he was in the Napa Valley, he trained in France, I believe the Pasteur Institute, right at the time that they were discovering the importance of, to get geeky for a second, malolactic fermentation, and the importance of that to making great Bordeaux wine and thus great Cabernet-based and Merlot-based wines. He came over to help BV, Beaulieu Vineyards wines, come back to quality after Prohibition, when they continued to be able to make wine, but for sacramental purposes. Quality was not an option. They weren't able to sell wine at good prices, etc. So he was hired by Georges de Latour to bring the quality back to where it potentially could get to. And he came with that French training, that French mindset, and also a spirit of mentorship. and then really helped to show the potential of Napa Valley Cabernet.
Yeah, and he was. He didn't just work at BV, he became a mentor to an entire generation. Because you have to remember, Napa post-Prohibition, very few people really had much knowledge, technical knowledge, of proper viticulture and proper winemaking. They just didn't know. They could farm, right? These were boots in the ground farmers, but that only gets you so far, quality-wise. It just does, right? And he really was very generous with his knowledge, and he sort of was like his life's mission to really amplify the Napa Valley and in the surrounding regions. He advised people what varietals to plant where, and he was sort of a team with Louis Martini, because Louis Martini was had a big farming company. They had a big winery, but also a big farming company. So they would work as a team on how to develop vineyards. But Joe Heitz's story starts with Telechef at Boyle Vineyards.
Let's show the picture of them geeking out in the cellar there. So, I mean, not the cellar, the lab. This is so Andre Telechef,
It
right?
is.
With them,
He always had his lab coat on.
Oh my gosh! But that's Joe Heitz on the right.
I know.
That's from
A
y'all's
very-
archive.
Yeah, very young Joe Heitz. I mean, he spent 10 years working under Telechef at BV. And in that time had really sort of honed his craft, but also decided the style that he really wanted to make. And with Telechef's blessing, he struck off on his own. In 1958 was his first vintage. It wasn't an estate wine. His first 2 years, actually, he didn't make Cabernet because he was trying to decide where he could actually buy a vineyard. So his first 2 years, he made Pinot Noir and Chardonnay were actually sourced from Hansel in Sonoma, just to get his brand started. He then bought his first vineyard, which is where our tasting room is now on Highway 29. It was purchased from a guy named Leon Brindel, who was a Swiss guy who had lived here for a number of years, worked at Inglenook before. It's very odd stories of this guy. He was a really quirky guy. And then he started to decide, what Heitz was. He was a big believer in monovarietal wines. He didn't believe in blending. So every Heitz Cabernet you've ever had has been 100% Cabernet. He never blended anything with Cabernet. I've gotten old enough and drank enough wine, so I realized there's rarely a wrong or right. It's just different approaches. And there were people who would argue that no, you need these other varietals to sort of fill in the holes texturally that Cabernet is sort of missing. And his argument with that is he would especially, his first wines were not single vineyard wines, they were blends from different regions. He used the textural complexity of different sites to add complexity to a wine. So the wine you have here is Lascombes 91, and it's a cuvée that he started making in 1969. And the impetus here was he could blend Eastern benchland, Western benchland, and then mountain fruit, blend that together, and he could create texturally and structurally a much more complete wine. But he was also really committed to aging the wines for a very long time. If you ever read any of Joe's transcripts, he was a bit of a curmudgeon, and he was really outspoken. So he says, he goes, the French, they just rip everybody off. He goes, they make these wines, they sell them to you before they even put them in the bottle, and then when you get the wine, they tell you don't drink them for 20 years, right? He's quoted saying that. Yeah.
That's hilarious.
So he goes, the science behind the way we make the wine still, because we make them the same way at Heitz is, gentle fermentations, lighter extraction, but very long aging in the cellar before bottling. So the Lascombes 91 will be bottled 4 years after harvest, and then usually released about 6 months up to a year later, depending. And what that does is that softens the coarse tannins that are just natural as a structural element of Cabernet Sauvignon. But what you also get is concentration, because in cellars, wines evaporate. That's why we have to do something called top-ups. We open the bung, we have to keep topping it up. So through that evaporation, you get natural concentration. And it was a really brilliant model. It's similar to like Barolo Reserva or Brunello Reserva, where you would age those wines for 4 years before bottling or releasing. And you get much more complexity, a lot of density, but you keep the same amount of acidity in the wines, which really freshens the wines.
So when we did last month's Quench, it was Goated Grape Chardonnay, and David Ramey, who I think of as a Chardonnay artisan,
Yes.
he said that the reason Chardonnay is goated is because it is the red of whites, in the
Sure.
sense that it sees malolactic very often, and it sees oak.
Yeah.
And so could you just talk about the importance of oak here when it comes to Cabernet Sauvignon?
Yeah, so
And actually, let's show that label one more time, because this, if I read it right, it's a mix of everything from regular barriques, 225 liter barrels, up to 12,000 liter.
So we make, our process is pretty unique at Heitz, and we didn't create the process. It was Joe created the process. So we ferment everything the same, regardless of what vineyard it comes from, and then everything goes into these big 12,000 liter wood casks, and they sit there for 9 months. They don't go into a barrique yet. And what we do is we blind taste all of the lots. Brittany and I do. Brittany Sherwood's the director of winemaking. She's been there since 2012 as the winemaker. And we're judging is the structure of the wine, the power, the tannins, the density, and then we decide what vessel it'll be aged in. So if it's really, really, really light, doesn't have a lot of structure, it will actually spend its entire life in a 12,000 liter cask or something of that similar size, all the way down to the most structured, most powerful, will go in a barrel, a barrique. Not always new, but definitely in a barrique.
What will that do? Like, why the power into the small barrel?
Well, it's really critical for aeration and oxygen. So when you add oxygen to solution to a wine, it promotes the tannins which are the astringency you get. It's the same thing that if you eat a banana a little bit underripe, it's a little astringent, or if you forget your steeping tea and you drink it, it's astringent around your lips.
Yeah.
That's tannin. It's the same thing that's in grapes. That bonds with the color pigment, which is anthocyanins, and that falls out of solution. What that does is that'll soften the wine and actually make it lighter in color as well. But you need oxygen for that to happen. The larger the vessel, the slower that process, right? And for much more powerful SKUs, we really want to introduce quite a bit of oxygen during that élevage to soften and really, really polish the wine.
Okay.
Very, very important. And we try different things. We experiment. We have some things aging in amphora and things like that. They're really interesting blending elements, but there is no human known replacement for a wood barrel. There just isn't.
Yay!
Yeah.
AI can't take that away.
No.
So a couple things you said. SKUs, that just means like the particular wine.
Oh, did I say SKU?
Yeah,
Sorry.
you did.
Yeah.
And then élevage aging regimen. Yeah.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
élevage is, they call it's raising the wine.
Yeah.
And it's how long the wine is aged in the cellar before it is bottled. And there's a lot of different vessels that you can use depending on the result. So typically, really fresh, bright red wines sometimes we'll never see wood. They'll just be fermented, pressed off, and just aged and staying so bottled. Those are really inexpensive. You typically drink those cold. Those are country wines from around the world. And sometimes they'll be aged in amphora, which are sort of clay pots. We have wood in every different size. Now they're aging in glass, which we've experimented with, which I don't think adds anything to a wine whatsoever. There's all these things that people try. They always come back to a barrel. They just do. Now, I would say is that where we always have to be careful is the percentage of new barrel, because a new barrel will add an enormous amount of flavor that can overwhelm a wine. So we're really always trying to balance the size of the wood vessel, but also the age of the vessel. The other part is different coopers have very different flavor profiles. Different forest from France, typically have different, or Germany or Slovenia, wherever the oak comes from, very different flavor profiles, and also the toast level. Because when you make a barrel, they actually toast the inside of a barrel. So there's this huge flame, and they're rolling around. These guys are masters at what they do. So everything from completely no toast to high toast. I think high toast is pretty much, or should be, preserved for whiskey production. So typically for high quality wine, you're looking from 0 to low, maximum medium toast.
So you mentioned amphora, and maybe I made this up because when I get ready for these shows, there's a lot to do,
yes,
and
a lot of
my
data.
head spins. But I thought I saw some reference to amphora on the Lascombes notes. Is there any amphora?
Yeah, we actually experiment with amphora at all of our wineries. And the reason is that different varietals, different terroir will react differently in amphora. I really like amphora. I just have rarely had certain varietals that you can do very, very well, and you can do the entire aging in amphora and bottle them, and they're really beautiful because amphora does have oxygen exchange, so you can soften tannins, right? But the profile is different. Cabernet Sauvignon solely just aged in amphora. I've not had one as a single cuvee, only exclusively aged in amphora. That's been great. They're fantastic as a blender because it really preserves fruit in the mid palate really nicely in high tones. So it's a great blending element to raise the aromatic profile. It's really great for white wines. We've had great success at Burgess. We make actually a Old Vine Pinot Gris that we do 100% in amphora, and it's the tension, the minerality is really great. I've had actually from the Uco Valley in Argentina some Malbecs that have been really fantastic in amphora. Malbec does really well in amphora, but Cabernet Sauvignon, I haven't had one. It doesn't mean it's not possible. It may be user error, which you know, when you're making a wine, there's so many variables. We may need to adjust how we ferment the wine, how we press the wine, how we grow it. We may have to change those things to keep experimenting. But they're all just sort of like a spice rack in the blend. I can take one vineyard, one terroir, and I can age it in all these different vessels. The wine will taste very, very different.
So this wine with the chocolate, now what you need to do though is you need to throw a little bit of the salt on there. Throw a little bit of the salt on there.
You gotta salt bay it.
Fantastic. But before you do that, or whatever order you'd like, it's spectacular with the custard if you haven't had that yet. It's such a delicious pairing. Everything, of course, goes great with the cheese.
One thing I'll say is really what makes also Cabernet Sauvignon so special, and it's the reason why we hung our hat on it in Napa, is when we talk about the structural elements of a grape, it's also what makes Chardonnay really great. Is Cabernet, we have really structured tannins. We have great aromatic complexity. Cabernet Sauvignon has this whole range of aromatics, including florality, a slight herbaceous vegetal note. It's got red and black fruits. It's got all these things you really love. It's got great mid palate, but it has this incredible ability to preserve acidity, even in warm vintages, right? And that's really unique. Chardonnay can do that as well. It can hold acidity really, really well. And whether you like really high acid wines or mid-acid wines, depending on the region, the vintage, it'll be in that realm, but they're not flabby wines. When I mean flabby wines, these are flat wines that just have no cut. And why that's really important is it's important for wines often to have a certain amount of acid for aging, keeps the wine fresh, but also with food, right? When you're thinking you're drinking wine with food, the acid really refreshes the palate. It makes you salivate. It can cut through fat. You know, all these things that you need when you're eating, right? It's the reason why we always want a nice steak. We want a great rack of lamb. You know, we want, you know, sometimes a great duck breast. I eat a lot of duck breast with Bordeaux. And it's because it breaks down the fat, both the tannin and the acid, and it keeps the palate refreshed. So you want to take another bite. You want to take another sip. And that's really important when we're looking at, like Heitz specifically has been really focused on the acid structure. Cabernet Sauvignon always has enough tannin. It's just the nature of it. We don't ever have to try to get more tannin. But we try to farm in a way that preserves acid in the wine as much as we can, because it really cuts through.
I feel like we were twins separated at birth, because like to me, the acid, it makes your mouth water, so it makes food taste better, right? Every condiment in your refrigerator or your cabinet, if it isn't based on salt, it's based on acid, right? If you're throwing a squeeze of lime or whatever it is, all mustard, vinegar, all the dressings, not the dressings I grew up with, Thousand Island is sugary.
But barbecue sauce has a lot of vinegar in it.
Exactly, and so that's a huge thing, and then that counterbalancing to tannin and fat. That's why we have, like, it's fantastic with the cheese. It's fantastic, and I loved what you said about that those elements in Cabernet that are slightly herbaceous. That's why we threw the rosemary and the thyme at you, because if you haven't done a little bit of that with the popcorn or even with the cheese and the wine, you're going to suddenly start to see that level of detail and excitement come through when you taste them, which is super cool. We're just about at our time, and we've told a little bit of a story that's very exciting, though, as we go into, as we are almost to the 50th anniversary of the 1976 Paris tasting, which really is it was a moment that launched many terroirs, the belief in the potential of many across the world, and showed us what the French know so well and shared so generously, which is sort of how to make the most of it. And so next month here at Copia, the whole week of May 11th-ish is a celebration of that. There will be a bunch of different events. This Quench episode will be inspired by that, and you've gotten a little bit of a taste of that because I will be theming it, and we'll show this graphic for you, the Mount Crushmore of American wine,
That's
which
great.
you've heard about Robert Mondavi, Andre Chelichev, Stephen Spurrier, Patricia Gallagher, the unsung hidden figure whose idea the tasting was.
Yep.
She said we need to celebrate the quality of potential being shown now of wines coming out of California. She was working for the Académie du Vin wine school that was owned by Stephen in Paris, and said, hey, over the last 2 years, they had celebrated the July 4th, which is a joint holiday, frankly, of us and the French, the American independence. And but we never do it with proper California wines because all they had in Paris was some jug stuff.
That's correct.
And that's why they started this whole adventure to bring the bottles over, which Andre had a tasting group and a group of vintners who brought the bottles over in their suitcases.
I never knew that.
Yeah, so he was bringing a group of vintners, including people like Jim Barrett, Andy Beckstoffer, and Bob Travers, and so on, Margaret Beaver, who became Margaret Mondavi, to Paris and to France to visit all of his great French contacts and really, come to the mothership, come to the source and get some intel. They didn't know why they were bringing the wines, but Stephen had come over, and the story with Heitz is he went to Heitz, and Joe said, "Go away."
Yeah, that sounded like Joe.
And he said, but I love your Chardonnay. It reminds me of Meursault. And then, of course, which is a very important French Burgundy Chardonnay, and Joe was smitten by that.
He goes, "Well, come on in."
And he's like, okay, then you can come taste. And so that was, of course, one of the wines that in the tasting that also showed really well. But we'll be doing the Mount Crushmore of American wine as our episode here. So we'll explore wines inspired by those visionaries. And through the voices of the winemakers of today that they inspired. So we'll have lots of cool people here. And then there will also be a screening of a short film version of the documentary that week a couple of times. So I'll show you one last little quick teaser of that before we go. Even if you've never been to California, you probably know that here in the Napa Valley, wine is king. But it wasn't always that way.
I was just lucky I was free that day.
It's completely leveled the playing field across the world of wine.
A single column Time magazine article tucked beside a tire ad.
Our Chardonnay had been $4 for the previous year, 1972. Now it skyrocketed to $6 a bottle.
Nobody thought that it would be even possible to compete with the great French wine.
There's no fait accompli. There's no gold medal forever.
Wine became a passport, and wine country became a destination all its own.
When there is a terroir, whatever happens there, whatever grows there, whatever traditions and cultural customs develop there, it's this unique blend of things that could not have happened anywhere else. And if it's really good, it finds its way into your heart.
Awesome.
So, cool, thanks. So we'll be excited to see you here, and thank you for all of you who joined us from streaming live. I see a lot of friends that have come into the into the comments. Apparently, I've been swallowing a little bit of this wine. But thank you so much, Carlton.
It's my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Incredible. And what do you guys think? This has been pretty great, right? And I think my live audience has some questions, so we're going to hang around for a second here. But for those of you who joined us from home, we are signing off, and we'll show you a cool little graphic of our next show before we dance it out, and then we'll hit the. You can go ahead.